Make sure mic is on. Mic is on. Mic is on. Okay. Okay, guys, let's caffeinate, hydrate. Get our caffeine in. Get our water in. And let's go right back into reading Project 2025. If you are joining here and this is your first time, welcome. If it's not your first time, welcome back. I am also live on Twitter Spaces if you just want to listen and don't want to be live. But don't worry, if you miss this Project 2025 reading, I will upload every single night when I do a live reading to my YouTube channel, and that's linked over on here on my TikTok. But also, I'm doing a playlist of a summary of what I'm reading. Those will take a little more time, but I think I'm already up to like part 5 on that. So, with that being said, we are on page 133. We have covered a myriad of topics. Feel free to go back and listen. Intros, bios, Restore America, authors, what they're all planning to do, White House. But now we are on part 5, which is the Department of Homeland Security with Ken Cuccinelli. So I think this one is quite a bit lengthy, so I will probably get through half of this today. And again, I will upload it later on as well. So, just to start off, feel free to like, follow, share, comment, subscribe, all that yada yada, shameless plug bullshit. But I just want you to be able to listen. So, these views are my own, but I am reading them real time. This is how I am interpreting things, and I'm trying to get the information out to you because it's very daunting. It's 920 pages. Some say it's 922. I'm not going to argue semantics on that. I just want to get the information out. So, that being said, let me... That might be a little bit easier. So, let's get right into it. Department of Homeland Security. Our primary recommendation is that the president pursue legislation to dismantle the Department of Homeland Security. My head's too big. I don't like this. It's a little better. So yeah, so right off the bat, page 133, if you're following along, you can find this on project2025.org. I simply printed it off because I wanted to see it. Like, I wanted it tangible. It actually takes 2 binders. It's not just one. That's how big it is. But our primary recommendation, and we're going to highlight as we go along, our primary recommendation is that the president pursue legislation to dismantle the Homeland Security Department. So, just, they want it gone. Okay. So after 20 years, it is not gelled into one DHS. Instead, its various components, different missions have outweighed its decades-long attempt to function as one department, rendering the whole disjointed rather than cohesive. Breaking up a department along its mission lines would facilitate mission focus and provide opportunities to reduce overhead that achieve more limited government. In lieu of a status quo DHS, we recommend that. So this is the following things that they recommend. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the CBP, be combined with Immigration and Custom Enforcement, ICE. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, the Department of Health and Human Services, HHS, Office of the Refuge Resettlement, OORR, and the Department of Justice, DOJ, Executive Office for Immigration Review, EOIR, and the Office of Immigration Litigation, OIL, into a standalone border and immigration agency at a cabinet level more than 100,000 employees, making it the third largest department measured by manpower. So they want to take all of that, dismantle it, and put it into one because they want limited government. Limited government means segregation. Limited government means more control. No. So they want the CBP, ICE, USCIS, HHS, the DOJ, the ORR, the OIL, the EOIR, all of that to be one department. I don't think that will work, but cool. Let's see what their plan is for that, okay? The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA, be moved to the Department of Transportation. What? You want Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency to be moved to the Department of Transportation. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, to be moved to the Department of Interior, or, if combined with CISA, to the Department of Transportation. So they want FEMA to then be part of CISA in the Department of Transportation. The U.S. Coast Guard, the USCG, be moved to the DOJ in time of full-scale war, i.e. threatening homeland, to the Department of DOD. Alternatively, USCG should be moved to the DOD for all purposes. They want limited government. They want small government. That's what they're referring to. Just take all of it and break it all down. The U.S. Secret Service, the USSS, be divided into two, with the protective element moved to the DOJ and the financial enforcement element moved to the Department of Treasury. This is the Transportation Security Administration, TSA, be privatized. Why would you want the TSA to be privatized? Something sounds fuckery. The Science and Technology Directorate, the S&T, be moved to the DOD, and the Office of Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction be moved to the FBI. All of the remaining supporting components could be dismantled because their function already exists in moving components as well as receiving departments. Cutting these costs would save the American taxpayers significant sums. They're not doing it to save you money, so don't fall for that bullshit. They're doing it to make limited government. They're doing it to get a greater defense budget, and they're doing it to support themselves. Don't ever think that it's coming back to the taxpayer, because that's an absolute fucking lie. Absolutely. Unless and until dismantling exists, recommendation is pursued and achieved. However, DHS will statutorily continue to exist, and its needs may reforms. Accordingly, we will now turn to recommended changes in the DHS as it exists now. So they want to dismantle it, then they want to make it, but until they can do so, they have to, here's what we want to do to downsize, to make it more taxpayer friendly. Mission statement. The Department of Homeland Security protects the American homeland and prepares them for terrorism and other hazards in both physical and cyber realms, provides for secure and free movement and free trade of travel, and enforces U.S. immigration laws impartially. The overview. The Department of Homeland Security, DHS, was created in the aftermath of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001, and subsequent mailings of anthrax spores. The Homeland Security Act of 2002, which was created, the department states that the DHS's primary mission is to prevent terrorist attacks within the U.S., reduce the nation's vulnerability to terrorism, minimize the damage from and assist in the recovery from any terrorist attacks, prepare and respond to natural man-made crises and emergencies, and monitor connections between illegal drug trafficking and terrorism, coordinate efforts to serve in such connections, and interdect illegal drug trafficking. That is, and again, you'll hear me say this a million, bagillion, trillion times. Use a fucking comma and a period. Because again, because people are going to read part of this and they're going to go, oh, okay, oh boy, but wait. So all that word salad should be, like, if I was an English teacher, I would just be circle, no, comma, space, period. But it's done intentionally. This is done intentionally. Unfortunately for our nation, the federal government's newest department became like every other federal agency, bloated, bureaucratic, and expensive. It also lost sight of its mission's priorities. DHS has also suffered from the left's wokeness and weaponization against Americans whom the left perceives as political opponents. I'm so tired of hearing this fucking word woke from them. It's just so ridiculous. To truly secure the homeland, a conservative administration needs to return the department to the right mission, the right size, and the right budget. This would include reorganizing the department and shifting significant resources away from several supporting components essential to the operational components. So let's highlight that. So the administration needs to return to the department to the right mission, the right size, the right budget. This would include reorganizing the department and shifting away resources from several supporting components to the essential operational components. Prioritizing border security and immigration enforcement, including detention and deportation, is critical if we are to regain control of the border, repair the historic damage done by the Biden administration, return to a lawful and orderly immigration system, and protect the homeland from terrorism and public safety threats. This also includes consolidating the pieces of fragmented immigration system into one agency to fulfill the missions more efficiently. The Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, the CISA, is a DHS component that the left has weaponized to censor speech and affect elections at the expense of securing a cyber domain and critical infrastructure which are threatened daily. Okay. Oh, thank you, Halo, for the votes. I appreciate you. That's crazy. So, again, they're just blaming the left. You're blaming anyone who isn't conservative, by the way, is just the left. If you don't agree with this book and you're a moderate, you're the left. You're woke. If you're an independent, you're woke. You're the left. That's all that talks about. But I'm going to highlight that one too. The Cybersecurity Infrastructure Agency is a threat to cyber domain. A conservative administration should return the CISA to its statutory and important but narrow mission. The bloated DHS bureaucracy and budget, along with the wrong priorities, provide real opportunities for a conservative administration to cut billions in spending and limit government's role in Americans' lives. These opportunities include privatizing TSA. So they want to privatize TSA. And the Federal Emergency Management System, FEMA, the National Flood Insurance Program, reforming FEMA emergency spending to shift the majority of preparedness and response costs and states to localities instead of the federal government, eliminating most of the DHS grant programs, and removing all unions in the department for national security purposes. So they want to, again, here's their opportunities. They want to privatize TSA and FEMA and the National Flood Insurance Program. They want to reform FEMA to emergency spending to shift the majority of preparedness and response costs to the states. So here's what happens with that. Let's say Florida gets 3 fucking hurricanes back to back to back to back, and DeSantis is bitching. Well, no, you got to come up with your own money yourself. No federal help. They want limited government in times of crisis. How many times do you see all of these fucking conservatives bitching about, I'm not voting for that, I'm not voting for that, and then taking credit for infrastructure, and then begging Biden, oh, please come out, because it's federal. There's a reason it's federal, because if something happens federally, it can be taken care of. Where do you believe the money is going to come from in a privatized state, in a red state, when there are crises? Like, how does that even make sense to anyone? Why would you privatize that? And TSA and National Flood? You do realize that a lot of these crises that happen are in red fucking states, but you want to make it so the states have to fund it. A successful DHS would secure and control the border, thoroughly enforce immigration laws, correctly and efficiently adjudicate immigration benefit applications while rejecting fraudulent claims, secure the cyber domain, and collaborate with critical infrastructure sectors to maintain their security, provide states and localities with limited federal emergency response and preparedness. Do you want your states to fucking fail? Do you want them? Because what happens at that point? What happens if there's hurricanes that rip through and you don't have the money and you've made it so you've downsized all of these organizations or privatized them? Do you really believe that there will be people who just put money into FEMA? Like private? You really believe that? No. Absolutely insane. Okay, page 136. They want to secure our coasts and economic zones, protect political leaders, their families, and visiting heads of states or government, and oversee transportation security. The Office of the Secretary, SEC. In the next administration, the Office of the Secretary should take the following key issues and challenges to ensure the effective operation of DHS. Expansion of dedicated political personnel. The Secretary of Homeland Security is a presidentially appointed and Senate-confirmed politically appointee, but for budgetary reasons, he or she has historically been unable to fund a dedicated team of political appointees. Because it's federal. A first step for the Secretary to improve front office functions is to have his or her own dedicated team of political appointees selected and vetted by the Office of Presidential Personnel, which is not reliant on the detailees of other parts from the department to help ensure the completion of the president's next agenda. So what they're saying is, we're going to, for the Secretary of Homeland Security, they want to put their aces in their places. They want the president to be able to appoint who he wants to this. That was a weird call, and I apologize. An aggressive approach to Senate-confirmed leadership positions. Let me slide this down just a little second. For whatever reason, this one is bugging me. And then I just turn everything to shit. There we go. Sorry, guys. I can't just have, like, two colors when I'm marking things. It just doesn't make sense to me because my eyes can't read it like that. And when I go back and do summaries, I want to make sure my eye catches that. So, burp, burp, burp. Let's do this. 1 second. There we go. That's a little bit better. While Senate confirmation is constitutionally necessary requirement for approaching agency leadership, the next administration may need to take a novel approach to the confirmation process to ensure an adequate and rapid transition. For example, the next administration arguably should place its nominee for key positions into similar positions as acting. For example, putting a person to serve as a senior official performing in the duties of the commissioner of the CBP while that person is going through the confirmation process to direct ICE or become the secretary. This approach would both guarantee implementation of the day one agenda. Starting day one. We want this all done day one. We talk about, Trump said, I just want to be a dictator for one day. This is a day one agenda. They want to appoint people day one, but in the interim, they're going to do is acting. Like acting, but because we're downsizing, you'll be acting over the downsizing, and then you'll just be given it because you're a Trump yes man. Ooh, take a drink. Let's see. This approach would both guarantee implementation of day one agenda and equip the department for potential emergency situations while honoring the confirmation requirement. That is bullshit. That is absolutely a fucking lie. Oh, just in case something happens day one, no, that's a lie. They want what they want when they want it. The department should also look to remove lower level but nevertheless important positions that currently require Senate confirmation from the confirmation requirements. So they want to get rid of confirmation requirements. They want to downsize, and they want it all done day one. Although this effort would require legislation and also might be mooted in the event of legislation that closes portions of the department currently that have Senate confirmed leadership. Clearer, more durable, and political only line of succession. Based on previous experience, the department needs legislation to establish a more durable but politically oriented line of succession for agency decision-making purposes. The ideal sequence for line succession is certainly debatable, except in the circumstances where a career employee holds a leadership position in the department. That position should be deemed vacant for line of succession purposes, and for the next eligible political appointee in the sequence should assume acting authority. Further, individuals wielding acting secretary authority should have explicit authority to finalize agency actions, including regulations, to ensure the department's Homeland Security mission is fulfilled. Soft closure of unnecessary offices. Soft closure. Downsize, soft closure. No regulation. Appointed people. Day one. Making it budgetary and no Senate confirmations. Like, that doesn't sound like a check and balance to me. Soft closure on unnecessary offices. Pending a possible presidential decision to shrink or eliminate DHS itself, the next administration will have the obligation to protect the homeland as required by law. The security, therefore, can and should use his or her inherent discretionary leadership authority to soft close ineffective and problematic corners of the department. While these corners are to be determined, so it's we're gonna soft close, but it's TBD. We're not quite certain where that might be. Soft close. The secretary could shift personnel, funding, and operational responsibility to mission essential components of the department, including the office of the secretary itself. This effort would not only make the department more efficient, but it would also support a legislative move to shrink or dismantle the department by showing that the agency can fulfill national security critical functions without its current bloated bureaucracy. Restructuring and redistribution of career personnel to strengthen a political decision making and ensure that the taxpayer dollars are being used legally and efficiently. The secretary should make major changes in the distribution of the career personnel throughout the department. For example, personnel from parts of the department undergoing soft closure could be redistributed to what a workload intensive corners of the department, including national security, critical and transparency functions. All personnel with law enforcement capability should be removed immediately from the office billets and deployed to field billets to maximize law enforcement capacity. Wow. So just shift them all. Just compliance for grants and other federal funding. The next administration should take steps to restore lawfulness and integrity to the department's massive regime of federal grant programs, most of which are managed and distributed by the Federal Emergency Management Agency. The secretary should direct FEMA to ensure that all FEMA-issued grant funding for states, localities, and private organizations is going to the recipients who are lawful actors, can demonstrate they are in compliance with federal law, and can show their mission and actions support border homeland security mission. So funding when you need it, but not when you need it, but privatization, but federal money, but not federal money. Word salad. All applicants and potential recipients of such grant funding should be required to meet certain preconditions for eligibility, except for the receipt of post-disaster and non-humanitarian funding. What the hell do you think you use FEMA for? Just lollygagging? Hurricane Katrina? Well, there's a precondition. Was a hurricane gonna come? Was it gonna be overtaken? Like, really? That just, how do you prove that what you deem as non-humanitarian, and what else was FEMA going to be working there for? It should simply be considered ineligible for funding if you can't provide receipt of post-disaster or non-humanitarian funding. Such preconditions should include at least the following: certification by applicants that they comply with all aspects of federal immigration laws. Holy shit. You want to withhold money from FEMA in a disaster if your locality is not directly helping immigration. So if there's an immigration problem, the pre-existing condition, so now they're making FEMA a pre-existing condition. Think about what that means. Ineligible for funding. Certification by applicants that they comply with all federal immigration laws, including and honoring all immigration detainees. Holy shit. You're going to withhold federal money that you now don't want to be federal. You want privatized, to then say, you didn't follow immigration laws, so fuck your house, fuck your roof. I don't give a damn if you're flooded. We'll just have Trump throw some paper towel your way. Wow. Certification. Okay, so here's some more ineligible for funding. Certification by the applicants that they are both registered with E-Verify and using E-Verify in transparent and a non-evasive manner. For states and localities, that would require and include certification that all components of that government and not just the applicant agency are registered and with and use E-Verify. So they're saying again, if you don't use E-Verify, you're not getting funding, and they want to take all of it and privatize it anyway. So please explain to me how that makes for a better overall government when conservatives are just saying, you know what, if it's broke, don't fix it. If the applicant in the state or locality commitment by the state or locality to total information sharing in the context of both federal law enforcement and immigration enforcement. This would include access to the Department of Motor Vehicles and voter registration databases. So if you do not comply, when you need help from things such like FEMA, if you don't turn over access to the Department of Motor Vehicles and voter registration databases, you can be denied funding in a crisis. Wow. If motor vehicle and so if I don't turn over, as say Florida doesn't want to turn over their voter registration database, they can be denied. So you can potentially lose your entire ass because they don't want to give away any funds because the state wouldn't give up voter registration databases. That seems a little intrusive. Non-use of discretionary guest worker visa authorities. To stop facilitating the availability of cheap foreign labor in order to support American workers, particularly poor and middle-class American workers, and follow congressional intent, the Secretary should explicitly cease at using two discretionary authorities as part of his or her broader effort to support the American worker. The Secretary should make it clear that he or she will not use the Secretary's existing discretionary authority to increase the number of H-2B seasonal non-agricultural visas above the statutory set cap. The Secretary should not issue any regulations in support of H-2 eligible country list, the effect in which would prevent favoring certain foreign nationals seeking an H-2 guest worker visa based simply on their nationality. It goes back to what they talk about. When Trump hears asylum, that stupid motherfucker really does hear, oh, asylum. He think not asylum from like refuge. He thinks insane asylum. He thinks insane asylum. Restoration of honesty and transparency. The Secretary should use his or her inherent authority as a leader of the department to follow up with congressional and other partners to disclose information and provide transparency that has been obstructed during the Biden administration. The Secretary should proceed from the assumption that congressional inquiries and public information requests were unfulfilled and then seek to fulfill them. Replace the entire Homeland Security Advisory Committee. The Secretary should plan quickly to remove all current members of Homeland Security Advisory Committee and replace them as quickly as is feasible. They're talking about day one again. They're going back to day one. U.S. Customs and Border Protection, the CBP. If all immigration agencies are not merged, including the USCIS and the ORR, then an appropriate third alternative would be to consolidate ICE and CBP to form a combined Border Security and Immigration Agency, the BSIA. The bullshit is always. This would, this would integrate critical interdirection, enforcement, and investigate resources, enhancing coordination and refocusing collective efforts on the vast, complex, cross-border threats impacting our nation's health, safety, and national security. It would also simultaneously add efficiencies to our nation's capacity to facilitate lawful travel and trade. The BSIA should establish clear mission requirements, responsibilities, and mandates under existing law regarding the persistent need for utilization of the U.S. military personnel and resources to assist the BSIA with increasing whole of government efforts and long-term strategies to secure our nation's borders effectively. In addition, appropriate elements within the newly created BSIA should be designated as part of the U.S. national security and intelligence community. A conservative administration should eliminate any prohibitive guidance, direction, or mandate from DHS or the administration that curtails or limits CBP from publishing detailed border security and enforcement data not impacting intelligence, interdirection, and investigative operations, methods, or sources. DHS should issue a regulation mandating that the CBP publish accurate and timely border security data readily available to the public on a regular basis that avoid White House and DHS leadership review and approval. The White House should grant the authority of the CBP and the DHS executives to utilize component aviation assets under the Office of Air and Marine, the OAM. CBP and DHS have worldwide missions with personnel and facilities that are deployed across the globe in every state in the U.S. With a CBP workforce and more than 60,000 people, 240,000 plus for DHS, encompassing more than 1,000 land, sea, and airports, it is essential for the commissioner, the deputy commissioner secretary, and the deputy secretary can travel efficiently to facilities to maintain appropriate situational awareness across the department's vast mission set and interact with an expansive workforce. Although CBP operates one of the largest aviation components of any U.S. domestic law enforcement agency, executives are prohibited from utilizing the agency's aviation assets to facilitate official travel. I'm going to highlight that. Executives are required to fly on commercial airlines, and this requirement significantly limits their ability to have classified communication and takes them offline for extended periods of time. Border Patrol, BP, and OAM should be combined with CBP, BP has more than 20,000 personnel, and OAM has approximately 1,800. OAM's assets are dedicated in support of BP operations the vast majority of the time. Yet redundant approvals, strategies, and independent hierarchy commands serve as impediments to the efficiency and the practical resource of deployments. CPB should start to expand the use of horseback-mounted border patrol. That's okay. As part of the announcement, the secretary should sound clear records and personnel files. Wait a minute. You want to go back to horseback personnel, but you don't want to fly commercial because you'll be offline? As part of this announcement, the secretary should make clear that the personnel files who were falsely accused by Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas of whipping migrants and issue formal apology on behalf of DHS and CPB. Is it serious? The secretary should combine with the Office of Trade, the OT, Trade Relations, with the Office of Field Operations, OFO. The smallest of the CPB's components and operational counterpart, the OFO, has a workforce of more than 30,000, and the OT's function is interwoven with that of the OFO's operational counterpart. Combining with OT, the OFO would achieve streamlined operations and increase OT's capacity and capabilities of leveraging the OFO's expansive resources. CPB, ICE, and USCIS all have authority to issue notices to appear, the NTA, to remove aliens in their presence, which begins removal proceedings. In most instances, CPB should turn illegal aliens over to ICE for detention, and ICE then can issue necessary NTAs, the notices to appear. CBP should issue NTAs only in limited situations for humanitarian reasons such as medical emergencies. In addition, CPB should eliminate the use of notice to report NTRs altogether. So you want to issue notices to appear only when it's a medical emergency, but you want to eliminate notices to report altogether. Why would you do that? CBP's established national standards for transport, escort, detention, and search, TEDS, have been widely interpreted and expanded by lower courts. This has resulted in unrealistic and differing detention standards for CBP facilities based on the jurisdiction within they fall. It negatively impacts operations of ICE and they have suffered similarly. A single nationwide detention standard should be codified that prevents individual states from mandating that federal government agencies adhere to widely expansive and ever-changing sets of standards. Such standards should allow the flexibility to use large number of temporary facilities as tents. The annual costs associated with establishing and maintaining temporary facilities to address the flow of illegal migration and associated care, transportation, and processing are prohibitive, and the CBP's budget is inadequate. CBP is forced to forego critical mission essential endeavors to fund the additional associated costs. Often, this requires reprogramming of funding at the DHS level, which has a negative impact on the DHS component's operations. This predictable cost that has been paid for in the existing CPB's and DHS funding levels reduces the CPB's operational readiness and ability to accomplish its diverse critical missions to protect the American people. The next president should request a realistic budget that fully pays for these costs. Increased funding is needed for BPs to hire additional support personnel, which would relieve uninformed BP agents from the administration duties associated with processing aliens and allow them to return to their national security mission. Congress should increase the facility funding upgrades and strategic land ports of entry, POEs, including expanding the state-of-the-art technology such as non-intrusive inspection equipment. Today, the cartels exploiting the aging facilities and lack of adequate technology to smuggle illicit drugs, contraband, and more successfully throughout our nation's POEs. U.S. Immigration Customs and Enforcement, so ICE. Needed reforms. Since the formation of DHS, ICE has been tasked with auxiliary missions that have little or nothing to do with immigration or customs. To return ICE to its primary mission, a new administration that wishes to restore the rule of law to our immigration enforcement should do the following. Order ICE to stop closing pending immigration cases and apply the Immigration and Nationality Act written by Congress. The Biden administration closed out tens of thousands of immigration cases that had already been prepared and were slated for expedited removal, processings, or hearings from the U.S. Immigration Court. This misguided action constituted an egregious example of lawlessness that allowed thousands of illegal aliens and other immigration violators to go free in the United States. Direct ICE to stop ignoring criminal aliens identified through the 287G program. Ultimately, Congress should prevent ICE from ignoring criminal aliens identified by local law enforcement agencies that are partners in the 287G program. However, before congressional action, ICE should be directed to take custody of all aliens with records, felonies, crimes, violence, DUIs, previous removals, and any other crime that's considered national security or public safety threat as identified under current laws. So stop ignoring the criminal aliens at program 287G. Eliminate T and U visas. Victimization should not be a basis for immigration benefit. Wow. Victimization should not be a basis for immigration benefit. If an alien who is trafficking or a crime victim is actively and significantly cooperating with law enforcement as a witness, the S visa is already available and should be used. Pending the elimination of the T and U visas, the Secretary should significantly restrict eligibility for each visa to prevent fraud. Issue clear guidance regarding detention and bonds for aliens. Thousands of illegal aliens are allowed to bond out of immigration detention only to disappear into the interior, where they will commit more crimes in the United States and many others will disappear, never to be heard from again. This occurs primarily because of poorly worded bond regulations, contradictory bond policy memoranda, and poor practices for managing released aliens and the alternative to the detention ATD programs, which require significant reform. They want to, the next one is prioritize national security in the Student Exchange Visitor Program, the SEVP. ICE should end its current cozy deference to educational institutions and remove security risks from the program. This requires working with the Department of State to eliminate or significantly reduce the number of visas issued to foreign students from enemy nations. Most of the foregoing can be accomplished rapidly and effectively through executive action that is both lawful and appropriate. Additionally, ICE should clarify who is responsible for enforcing its criminal and civil authorities. It should also remove self-imposed limitation on nationwide jurisdiction. Homeland Security Investigations, HSI, special agents at the 1811 series should enforce Title 8 and 18 crimes as the biggest part of their portfolio. Alien smuggling, trafficking, cross-border crime as defined under Title 8 and Title 18 should be the focus of ICE operations. The role of ICE deportation officers should be clarified. ICE enforcement and removal operations, ERO, should be identified as being primarily responsible for enforcing civil immigration regulations, including civil arrest, detention, and removal of immigration visitors anywhere in the United States without warrant where appropriate, subject only to civil warrant requirements of the INA where appropriate. All ICE memoranda identifying sensitive zones where ICE personnel are prohibited from operating should be rescinded. Rely on the good judgment of officers in the field to avoid inappropriate situations. Motherfucker, where? I'm just going to allow border enforcement to just use their good judgment at any given cost. To maximize the efficient use of resources, ICE should make full use of the existing expedited removal or ER authorities. The agency has limited use of ER eligible aliens apprehended within 100 miles of the border. This is not a statutory requirement. New policies. The U.S. national security and public safety interests would be well served if ICE were combined with CBP and USCIS as mentioned above. Additionally, ICE, HSI, along with CBP, should be full participants in the intelligence community. The use of Blackie's warrants should be operationalized within ICE. These civil warrants are commonly used for work site enforcement when agents have probable cause that illegal aliens are employed at a business. This would streamline investigations. Safeguarding Americans will require not just searching the border, but continuous vetting and investigations of many aliens who exploited President Biden's open border for potentially nefarious purposes, including some Afghani evacuees sent directly to the U.S. Americans' disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan. Wow. Budget. Congress should mandate and fund additional bed space for alien detainees. ICE should be funded for a significant increase in the detention of space, raising the daily available number of beds to 100,000. Congress should fund ICE for at least 20,000 ERO officers and 5,000 Office of the Principal Legal Advisors, OPLA attorneys. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the USCIS. The U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, USCIS, is the agency tasked with administering the legal immigration and certain temporary visa programs. Needed reforms. Since January 2021, the USCIS's priorities have been misaligned, and that has been transformed into an open borders agency, ignoring the critical role it plays in national security, public safety, and safeguarding the integrity of our immigration system. USCIS should be returned to operating and screening and vetting agency. Regulatory efforts have been focused on easing asylum eligibility in a manner that is guaranteed to exacerbate asylum fraud as people surge at the border. Emphasis has also been placed on removing legal barriers to immigration, such as the use of public benefits. These actions violate statutes, erode congressional intent, and provide significant magnet for continued illegal immigration. Additionally, USCIS resources have been misappropriated to focus more on creating and expanding large-scale parole and temporary status programs that violated the law and are otherwise contrary to congressional intent, instead of focusing on a more secure and efficient process for those who are seeking benefits. The ever-increasing number of applicants filed has made it difficult to vet applicants adequately eligibility for fraud and specifically for national security and public safety reasons. The Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate, the FDNS, is currently a small directorate with assigned officers supporting through the chain of command in the field, and has led to stovepiping, lack of coordination in national policy, and inconsistencies throughout the agency. To prioritize vetting and fraud detection, the FDNS should undergo a structural shift focused on direct reporting from the field to headquarters, reclassification of leadership, and the FDNS directives taking precedence over those components' entities. Correcting the current misalignment of agencies' priorities and resources should begin with its primary focus shift in vetting into fraud and detection. These actions would reform the agency, returning it to its screening and vetting mission in protecting the homeland. In other structural changes should include reimplementation of the USCIS denaturalization unit in an effort to maintain integrity in the system by identifying prosecuting criminals and civil denaturalization cases in combination with the Department of Justice for aliens who obtain citizenship through fraud or other illicit means. Additionally, USCIS should create a criminal enforcement component within the agency to investigate immigration benefits fraud under Title VIII, perhaps requiring the additional legislative and regulatory authorities for the office themselves, and to prosecute cases through Special Assistant U.S. Attorney SAUSAs with substantive knowledge in the field. Particular attention should be paid and given to those addressing increasing incidences of forced labor trafficking and temporary work visa programs. While the Biden Regulatory Agency has focused on at least two major rules, the credible fear rule and the public charge rule, USCIS has utilized other policy and internal procedural mechanisms to extend employment and authorize to large groups of people who are in the country without legal status. The agency has taken quite a step to cut corners and lessen standards during transition periods. A complete audit of agency policies, memoranda, and management directives issued during the Biden administration should be completed, and redecision documents should be prepared for issuance within the first few days of the incoming administration. So again, day one. Additionally, regulatory documents should be drafted to review or reverse all regulations promulgated during the Biden administration. I'm going to highlight that one. Additionally, all regulatory documents should be drafted to review or reverse all regulations promulgated from the Biden administration. New policies. To advance national interest, the three core immigration agencies, the USCIS, ICE, and CBP, should reemerge and have immigration elements outside of DHS, such as ORR and HHS included. The fragmented immigration enforcement framework that developed in the wake of the Homeland Security Act has weakened the agency and should be remediated. Combining these critical agencies should strengthen their capabilities, ensure cooperation, and promote information sharing. Agencies responsible and the delineation of authorities should be inconsistent, such as an inconsistent use of deferred action and issuance of the NTA by each agency, have long been a point of contention that would be addressed more easily if they were recombined into a single entity. Alternatively, new policies for the USCIS as it currently exists should focus on matters that can be addressed through the administrative actions. Number one, the workforce should be realigned as necessary, retrained on base eligibility and fraud detection rather than speed in processing. Number two, training should be returned to the Federal Law Enforcement Training Centers, the FLETC, which would underscore the enforcement role of the USCIS as a vetting agency and be rebranded accordingly. Number three, management directives and policies should realign to ensure that the workforce, while adaptable to be able to handle the bulk of the USCIS mission, is not allowed to be pulled off workforce focus for unlawful programs, DACA, mass parolees for Afghanistan, Ukrainians, Venezuelans, etc., which divert resources away from nuclear family and employment programs. Wow. So that's going to be there. So DACA, right there, DACA, mass parole for Afghans, Ukrainians, and Venezuelans. So it diverts away from family and employment programs. The regulatory agency and agenda should come to immediate submission and notice of the proposed rulemaking for the Trump administration's public charge rule, including aspects from the original notice proposed rulemaking. Temporary work visa reform, employment authorization reform rules, asylum bar rule, and a third country transit rule. At a minimum, enhanced regulatory agenda should include rules strengthening the integrity and the asylum system, parole reform, and U visas reform that prioritizes relief from victims of heinous crimes and ensures that we protect the truest and most deserving victims of crime. Not all policy changes require formal rulemaking. However, internal guidance documents are generally exempt under the Administrative Procedures Act, the APA. In the sub-regulatory space, the USCIS policy memos and operational guidance should reduce the validity of employment authorization documents and end the COVID flexibilities, including the reliance on biometric reuse. USCIS could also enforce existing regulations by rejecting incomplete applications and petitions, ensuring that they are both completed before accepted for filing, and the FDA signs off on all approved applications and petitions before approval notices are sent on the alien or petitioner. Other efforts should be focused on adjudication standards, returning to nearly 100% interview requirements for all appropriate cases. The incoming administration should spearhead immigration legislative agenda focused on creating merit-based immigration systems that reward high-skilled aliens instead of the current system that favors extended family based on luck of the draw immigration. Wow. The incoming administration, I'm going to highlight that 1 second. Luck of the draw administration. Good God. To that end, the diversity lottery should be repealed. Chain migration should be ended while focusing the nuclear family and existing employment visa program should replace the system and awarded to only the best and the brightest. Internal efforts to limit employment and authorization should be matched by congressional action to narrow statutory eligibility to work in the United States and mitigate fair employment competition for the U.S. citizen. The oft-abused H-1B program should be transformed into an elite program through which employers are vying to bring only top foreign workers and the highest wages, not so depressed American opportunities. I'm going to highlight that one. Additionally, Congress should improve the integrity of the temporary work visa programs, repeal temporary protected status designations, permanently authorize and make mandatory E-Verify, and end parole abuse by legislating specific parole standards. The USCIS should make it clear that while no court jurisdiction exists, it will not honor court decisions that seek to undermine regulatory, sub-regulatory efforts. Finally, the USCIS still requires access to all relevant national security law enforcement databases in the same vein as any other agency in an intelligence space. This is a key concept that should be addressed by the USCIS as a return to the functioning primary and vetting agency. Budget. The USCIS is primarily fee-funded, operating on revenue derived from those who are seeking immigration benefit, work permits, and naturalization. The total agency budget requested for the fiscal year of 2023, including both fees and small appropriations, is slightly less than $6 billion. I'll highlight that. The bulk of funds are derived from application fees through immigrant examination fee accounts. As a general principle, adjudication of applicants and petitions should be paid by applicants, not American taxpayers. It is critical that any changes to the budget, even in the wake of realigned agency combined with ICE and CPB, should retain a fee-funded model. So you want people who need to come here, and only the best of the best. Okay. Given the Obama and Biden administration's lack of will, fees should increase agency-wide to keep in step with inflation and the true cost of adjudications. The incoming administration, I'm going to highlight this, the incoming administration should immediately submit a fee rule that reflects such an increase. Aside from an increase in fees, the rule should drastically limit the availability for fee waivers and should implement a fee for asylum applications. Those seeking asylum they're seeking asylum. They're coming from places where they have nothing, but by all means. Wow, I'm going to highlight that one too. Implement a fee for asylum applicants. Additionally, Congress should allow for a 10% across-the-board increase in all fees and rules to account for the fact that new fee rules always lag behind budget requirements. The USCIS should strive to increase opportunities for premium processing and benefit by which applicants can expedite their processing times. While this places time burdens on adjudicators, it provides an opportunity for significant influx of money into the agency, which is not currently available. Yeah, so when they're down, kick them when they're down, get all the money that they can. This doesn't seem right with me. Maybe it's just me. It provides an influx and money of agencies. Okay. While simply raising fees to the necessary levels to make the agency run efficiently would be preferable, without the need for expanded premium processing, this short-term measure should be utilized, particularly if a longer-term fee rules are unsuccessful. At least the USICS is caught up on all case backlogs. At least until they are caught up on all backlogs. All applicants rejected for any benefit or status adjudication should be required to leave the U.S. immediately. Ordinary processes can resume once all backlogs have been adjudicated. There. Finally, USCIS should pause the intake of applications in a benefit category when backlogs in that category become excessive. Once USCIS adjudicators can decrease the caseload to a manageable number, applications should resume. Personnel. USCIS should be classified as a national security sensitive agency, and all of its employees should be classified as holding national security sensitive positions. Leaks must be investigated and punished as they would be a national security agency, and unions should be decertified. Documents at Mar-a-Lago. So, that's it, right? They should be punished, but not Donnie. We should just have his case completely thrown out. Any employee who cannot accept that change and cannot conform with their behaviors and standards required by such an agency should be separated. USCIS's DC personnel presence should be skeletal, and agency employees within operational security roles should be rotated out of the offices throughout the United States. These USCIS employees should live and work in the communities that are most affected by the daily duties and decisions. Necessary border and immigration statutory, regulatory, and administrative changes. The current border crisis was made possible by glaring loopholes in our immigration system. The result was a preventable and predictable historic increase in illegal and inadmissible encounters along our southern border. This pulled limited resources from the front lines in our nation's borders and away from the national security mission, releasing a vast and complex set of threats into our country. To regain our sovereignty, integrity, and security, Congress must pass meaningful legislation to close the current loopholes and prevent future administrations from exploiting them for political gain or ideology. Legislative proposals. Title 42, Authority, and Title 8. Create an authority akin to Title 42. Public Health Authority has been used during the COVID-19 pandemic to expel illegal aliens across the border immediately when certain non-health conditions are met, such as loss of operational control of the border. Number 2, mandatory appropriations for border wall system infrastructure. The monies would be used to fund construction of additional border wall systems, technology, and personnel in strategic locations in accordance with the BSIP, the Border Security Improvement Plan. Appropriations for port of entry infrastructure. Border security is not addressed solely by systems in between the ports of entry. POEs require technology and physical upgrades as well as an influx in personnel to meet the capacity demands and act as literal gatekeepers for the country. This is the first line of defense against drug and human smuggling operations. If you are following along, guys, we are now on page 148. I'm going to be talking about unaccompanied minors. Congress should repeal Section 235 of the Wilberforce Trafficking Victim Protection Reauthorization Act of 2008, the TVPRA, which provides numerous immigration benefits to unaccompanied children and only encourages more parents to send their children across the border illegally and unaccompanied. These children too often become trafficking victims, which means the TVPRA has failed. If an alternative to repealing Section 235 of the TVPRA is necessary, the section should be amended so that all unaccompanied children, regardless of nationality, may be returned to their home countries in a safe and efficient manner. How the fuck do they think they'll do that? Currently, the TVPRA only allows children from contiguous countries, Canada and Mexico, to be returned, while every other unaccompanied minor must be placed in a lengthy process that usually results in the minor landing in the custody of an illegal alien family member. So you just want to send minors just on their way. Congress must end the Flores Settlement Agreement by explicitly setting nationwide terms and standards for family and unaccompanied detention and housing. Such standards should focus on meeting human needs and should allow for large scale of temporary facilities, for example, tents. Number 4, Congress should amend the Homeland Security Act and portions of the TVPRA to move detention of alien children expressly from the Department of Health and Services to DHS. Asylum reforms. Number 1, the standard for a credible fear of persecution should be raised and aligned to the standard for asylum. It should also count specifically for credibility determinations that are a key element of the asylum chain. Number 2, codify former asylum bars and third country transit rules. Number 3, Congress should eliminate the particular social group protected ground as vague and overboard, or in the alternative, provide a clear definition with parameters and a minimum of codifying and holding matter of AB that gang violence and domestic violence are not grounds for asylum. You want to say that gang violence and domestic violence are not grounds for asylum. That's some shit. Really? Sorry, I was just looking at something. That's nuts. Parole reforms. Congress should end the widespread abuse of parole in contravention of statute and return it to its origins of extraordinary remedy for very limited purposes. NGOs and processing. Congress should halt funds given to non-governmental organizations, or NGOs, to process and transport illegal aliens into and through the United States. Such funds and infrastructure, including DHS joint processing centers, should be redirected to secure the border, detain aliens, and provide space for immigration court proceedings. Other pathways for border crossers. While Congress should use its oversight authority to ensure that expedited removal is to be used in the fullest extent and follow to the letter of the law, other paths for border crossers should be included in the legislative package. Migrant protection protocols. Update the statutory language provided for the basis for the Remain in Mexico program as needed to withstand judicial scrutiny and executive inaction. Number 2, asylum cooperative agreements. While the agreements themselves must be negotiated, Congress should mandate the executive branch work faithfully to negotiate and execute ACAs and set parameters to ensure that an unwilling executive cannot renege on an existing agreement or abandon effort. Number 3, other expedited pathways. Congress should explicitly permit programs akin to prompt asylum chain review, the PACR, in humanitarian asylum review process programs. Employment authorization. Number 1, Congress should reassert control of employment authorization, which is subject to rampant regulatory abuse, and limit certain categories of legal immigrants and non-immigrants. Number 2, Congress should also permanently authorize E-Verify to make it mandatory. State and local law enforcement. Number 1, Congress should unequivocally authorize state and local enforcement local law enforcement to participate in an immigration border security actions in compliance with Arizona v. United States. Number 2, Congress should require compliance with immigration detainees to the maximum extent consistent with the 10th Amendment and set financial disincentives for jurisdictions that implement either official or unofficial sanctuary policies. Prosecutorial discretion. Congress should restrict the authority for prosecutorial discretion to eliminate as a catch-all excuse for limiting immigration enforcement. Mandatory in detention. Congress should eliminate ambiguous discretionary language that Title VIII that aliens may be detained and clarify that aliens shall be detained. This language, which contrasts with other shall detain language in statute, creates helpful ambiguity and allows the executive branch to ignore the will of Congress. Regulations. Withdraw Biden administration regulations and reissue new regulations in the following areas. Number 1, credible fear asylum jurisdiction for border crossers. Number 2, public charge. T visas and U visa reforms. Unless and until T and U visas are repealed, each program needs to be reformed to ensure that only legitimate victims of trafficking and crimes who are actively providing significant material assistance to law enforcement are eligible for spots in the queue. Repeal TPS designations, H-1B reform, transform the program to an elite mechanism exclusively to bring the best and the brightest at the highest wages while simultaneously ensuring that U.S. workers are not being disadvantaged by the program. H-1B means only to supplement the U.S. economy and to keep companies competitive, not to depress U.S. labor markets in artificial in certain industries. Employment authorization. Along with the legislative proposal, take regulatory action to limit the classes of aliens eligible for work authorization. Executive orders. Pathways for border crossers. Direct the department, number 1, direct the department and state, number 1, start again. My eyes are getting buggy, hang on. Number 1, direct the Department and State and Department of Homeland Security to reinstate asylum cooperative agreement with Northern Triangle countries immediately. Number 2, recommence negotiations with Mexico to fully implement the Remain in Mexico protocols. Number 3, reinstate, to the extent possible, expedited pathways with full credible fear immigration court processes, the PACR and the HARP. Number 4, prohibit the use of notice to report, the use of any funds for travel to the interior of the United States and governed flights or transportation for aliens. Wait a minute. Prohibit the use of notices to report, the use of any funds for travel to the interior of the United States and government flights or transportation for aliens. Does anyone want to tell DeSantis? What about all these flights to like Martha's Vineyard? Where are you using those funds? Is that private? Number 5, mandate that ICE use all detention space in full compliance with Section 235 and the INA, issue weekly reports on detention capacity, and provide authority for low-level temporary capacity, for example, tents, once permanent space is full. Man, they are all about the tents, the tent cities. I'm going to tell you what. Eliminate the use, number 6, for the ADT for border crossers, except in rare cases and only with explicit authority of the Secretary. Number 7, prohibit the use of parole except in matters that are certified by the Secretary of Homeland Security as requiring action for humanitarian or significant public benefit reasons, and prohibit the use of parole in any categorical circumstances. Number 1, enforcement. Restrict prosecutorial discretion to eliminate as a catch-all excuse for limiting immigration enforcement. Number 2, mandate the use of E-Verify for anyone doing business within the government. Number 3, designate the USCIS as intelligent community adjacent, ensuring that it has access to national security and law enforcement databases. Number 4, rescind all memoranda limiting enforcement in immigration laws, including those identifying in sensitive zones. Number 5, end ICE's widespread use of termination of administration closure of cases in immigration court. averting or curtailing a mass migration event. Number 1, provide that whenever the Homeland Security determines that actual or anticipated mass migration of aliens en route or arriving off the coast of the U.S. presents urgent circumstances requiring immediate federal response, the Secretary may make, subject to the approval of the President, rules and regulations prohibiting the whole or in part of the introduction of persons from such countries or places he or she shall designate in order to avert or curtail such mass migrations and for such periods of time deemed necessary, including, though not the expulsion of such aliens. Use a comma and a period. Such rule and regulation shall not be subject to the requirements of the Administrative Procedures Act. Number 2, provide notwithstanding any other provisions of the law when the Secretary makes a determination and when it promulgates subject to the approval of President such rules and regulations, the Secretary shall have authority to waive all legal requirements that Title 8 that the Secretary in his or her sole discretion determines are necessary to avert or curtail mass migrations. My God, how many pages is this? Woo! I'm just trying to see where the end of this chapter is. Okay, I think I'm going to read this last part, guys. And then I'm going to read the USCIS. I'm going to finish the USCIS priorities, and then tomorrow we're going to start on what the needed forms are for FEMA. Okay, sub-regulatory matters. The USCIS priorities and structural changes. Ensure that focus is returning to vetting and base eligibility of applicants and fraud detection. Realign the Fraud Detection and National Security Directorate, the FDNS, to ensure agency nationwide consistency on implementation of fraud detection and vetting policies. Number 3, review and repeal any internal agency memo that is inconsistent with priorities described in this chapter. The 287G program. Issue a memo prohibiting any jurisdiction that applies from being denied access to the program unless good cause is shown. Homeland Security investigates HSI priorities. Issue Department Management Directive and ICE Companion Directive to refocus HSI on immigration offenses, criminal offenses typically associated with immigration, for example, human trafficking. All criminal investigations work without clear nexus to the border or otherwise to Title 8 should be turned over to the appropriate federal agencies. And this last one, Blackie's warrants. ICE, OPLA, ERO, and HSI should issue a joint internal memo on operationalizing Blackie's warrants for immediate use on worksite enforcement and other appropriate investigative operations. Woo! That one kind of hurt today. I'm going to tell you what, it's a lot of, like, there's little things, but it's still a lot of, like, so we're going to stop there today. Remember, I'm not here on Wednesdays, but I will be back on Thursday. And when we do, I will start here on Thursday. Let's see. That will be the 25th. So start 7/25. We're going to talk about the needed reforms for FEMA, cybersecurity, U.S. Coast Guard, U.S. Secret Service, Transportation Security Administration, the Management Directorate, the Office of Strategic Policy and Plans, Office of Intelligence and Analysis, Office of General Counsel, Office of Legislative Affairs, Office of Public Affairs, and Office of Partnership Engagement, Office of Operations Coordination Ops, Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties, the Office of Immigration Detention Ombudsman, and the Office of Citizenship and Immigration Services Ombudsman, Agency Relationships, and I think that's the end of that one. So that will take us all the way to page 170. And then after that will be the Department of State. So we got through quite a bit today. I was kind of surprised. It kind of reads like stereo instructions sometimes. Trust me, I get it. But we went all the way. Boop, 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 boop. So we went 133 to 153. We did 20 pages. That's a lot. It's a lot of reading, but it's good. And again, remember guys, I will upload this to YouTube if you missed it. I'll also be back live on Thursday, and I will do a summary when I can get to the summary, and I'm doing those in my playlist as you go. So if you follow the playlist, it just says Project 2025, it goes right in order of the summary of what I've read. So sometimes the parts are broken down into like 4, 5, or 6. It's never just going to be one, but I will always list what pages that I'm referring to and the highlights that we're referring to. So we're halfway through this, which is good. I think it's a good place to stop. And again, thank you for coming, guys. I will read this until it's done. Hopefully we can get this done way before the election so we will actually have time to talk about it. But other than that, I hope you guys have a great day. Thanks for joining.